Hi, welcome to another episode of Minimal Cast. This is Christian. Going to talk about one of my favorite tools, VCR, and I know it's probably yours too. That's why you're coming to this screencast. And I want to thank Myron Marston for developing the tool. I use it all the time in my day-to-day consulting with integrating QuickBooks and Ruby projects. But we do get that unhandled HTTP error a little too often sometimes. Now, this was taken care of or made easier to avoid this error with Myron putting in the custom matchers feature. So let's dive in and take a detailed look at the custom matchers in VCR. And I just had this unhandled HTTP request error message on all of my specs on a recent client project, and that's because the URI was changed in the main library that I'm using, QuickBooks Ruby. A commit came in that again is changing this base URI to interact with the new QuickBooks V3 API. So I wanted to do a global change here. Now, I didn't want to have to go into, let me go over here. I didn't want to have to go into each use cassette here because I have like 30 specs, maybe even more, that are using VCR to test the implementation with QuickBooks. So, and I already had a custom matcher, which I'm sure you've already been researching this topic. I already had one of these basic custom matchers that ignores the trailing ID on some of the, now on the project I am right now, we're only using VCR for the QuickBooks API. And on some of those API calls, usually the GET calls, you're going to have a URL that has an ID on the end, calling one of the QuickBooks records that has an ID. So I wanted to ignore that. That comes up a lot, probably comes up a lot in your projects too. But what ideally I wanted to do was to create a custom matcher that automatically detects if it's an Intuit request. Therefore, I could globally change and fix this problem without having to add a custom matcher to each VCR cassette. And to show you, here's a VCR cassette right here that I have a custom matcher on. That's the URI, ignoring trailing ID. So I didn't want to have to go to each spec and each cassette and have to handle this new error that I'm getting because the URI was changed in the base library. Didn't want to have to go to each cassette. I wanted to just have a global custom matcher that matches every request out to Intuit and handle it ideally right here in the support VCR configure block. So to do that, we're going to leverage a feature called setting the default custom options on a cassette. And it's called right there, default cassette options. And it's going to have a match request on, which is how you call a custom matcher, and it's going to be called for Intuit. So I'm going to make a custom matcher called for Intuit. Let's go up here and grab some of this for boilerplate. So I'm going to say for Intuit for this matcher. I'm going to use this as same code. Like I said, this is just some boilerplate for getting the request URIs and VCR in a custom matcher. Let me also put a built-in request matcher from VCR, which is the URI matcher. I'm going to use that for some of the default matching. Let's put an end block here. So now for each VCR spec, it's going to hit this code. And what I want to do is I want to say if Intuit, then do my logic here, else do everything else. You could even be a different API, but I want to filter out all Intuit requests going through VCR. So let's just comment that out right now. And let's just take a look at what happens here. So I'm gonna return true on these, but I'm gonna go just run a spec and just see what kind of output we get from those URIs. Okay, so let me go over to the right pane here. So here was the first puts I did. And you can see that that's the problem here, because this one has QuickBooks.api. The second request has QB.SBFinance. So there's a problem. That's what the change was in the QuickBooks Ruby library. That's why I'm getting the unhandled HTTP error. So this is what I want to handle globally now for these cassettes. Now, since both have the intuit.com at least in both URIs, let's just use that to match, because again, I want to do a global catch-all for the Intuit request first. So to do that, let me paste in here some boilerplate code. So here's that catch-all. We're just gonna take, again, all those cassettes that have intuit.com requests, and we're gonna do our logic here. So now I can put those requests all inside of this conditional. So now let me go about taking care of this issue. So I'm going back to this pane here. And what I'd like to do here, now you have to be careful with custom matching because you don't want to be too lenient. For example, I still want to make sure that VCR is matching this part of the URL. Keep me honest and keep those, again, going too lenient can lead to bad specs, okay? So what I'd like to do, or probably the best thing to do, is to just remove this part. This is the problem. This is the only thing that's changed in the library, is the QBSBFinance went up to the QuickBooks.api. So if I just remove that and sort of just had the HTTPS intuit.com and then the rest of the URI here, that would be a good solid matcher and would solve my problem. So let's go about, I'll go about implementing that solution. Now I'm just going to paste in what I came up with here, and that's just going to be a good old G sub. And I'm actually doing that not on the URI 1, but on the request URI itself, because I'm going to be putting up this conditional is also going to be having this matcher, and I'm putting in the full request here. So let's comment that out right now though, and let's take a look at what these, the output of these look now. Okay, let me run the spec. Oops. Oh, okay, let me go back here. Run the spec. Okay, and let's take a look at that output. Okay, you can see here now, this is the new, this is the output for request 1. This is the output for request 2. And that's what we want. That's still giving us it's a more lenient matcher, but still strict enough that it's giving us some good feedback. Okay, let's test this out now. Let me just take away that. Now this is going to be live, so to speak, because we're going to use the URI matcher. And we're putting in the requests. So this is before I just had the returning true each time. So let's run the spec. And let's see if we get a true. We should. Okay, yeah, we do have green there. So there you go. There's the basics of writing your own custom matcher. Now, in this case, let me remind you that this is a default cassette option. So it's going to run on every single request. So if there was a non-intuit request going through the cassette, this gets handled down here. And let me also mention that I did roll in this custom matcher here for ignoring the trailing ID. I also rolled this into my Intuit conditional block over here. And that is because the existing specs, like this one here on the cassette itself, it has the match request on, it will get overridden by it'll override the default options. So in other words, this one did not work if you have one set here. So I rolled the entire thing inside of right here in this conditional. So that's going to do it for this episode. Wanted to keep it short, really trying hard to do that. Don't want to get too long-winded. That'll give you enough to understand custom matchers a little bit more. Stay tuned for other minimal casts. I'm going to be doing a really cool series showing you how I made a Chrome extension with Angular, Bootstrap, using a resource, Angular ng resource, a bunch of cool stuff all jammed into a Chrome extension. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching this episode.